What happens when we stay in situations that eventually bleed out our souls? Relationships, friendships, careers that no longer align with who we are and who we wish to become. What does that rob from us? Welcome back to another episode of Rooted in Rising. I'm Dr. Carmela Maxell. Today, I want to talk about something I think many of us have experienced but rarely name. The times when we stay too long. Too long in relationships, too long in friendships, too long in jobs, too long in situations that are draining us. And because we're good people, because we're loyal, because we care deeply, we convince ourselves that staying is noble. But sometimes, what we call devotion is actually self-abandonment. Today's episode is called Daft and Devoted. Part 1. What does daft and devoted mean? Daft and devoted, because there comes a point when devotion stops being healthy, where we continue pouring energy into something long after it has stopped pouring anything back into us. We stay because we remember who someone used to be. We stay because we've invested years. We stay because we're hopeful. We stay because we're afraid of being the one who leaves. Sometimes grief isn't about death. Sometimes grief is accepting reality. Part 2, the relationship we keep rescuing. One of the biggest ways we become daft and devoted is through relationships. Not because we're weak, because we care. Potential is one of the most dangerous things in the world when it's used to justify staying somewhere unhealthy. Potential whispers, just give it more time. Look at how much progress they've made. Maybe next month will be different. Before we know it, we're no longer in a relationship with the person standing in front of us. We're in a relationship with the future version of them we've created in our minds. I've done this more than once. I've loved people for who they could be. I've stayed because I saw goodness, because I saw potential. I've stayed because I understood pain. I've stayed because I believed patience would eventually change the outcome. But eventually we must ask, am I loving this person? Or am I loving the story I've written about who they might become? I found myself in a situation where I was constantly asking for more. More time, more effort, more consistency. And I convinced myself that if I was patient enough, understanding enough, supportive enough, eventually things would change. That the hard days would soften. That I would finally feel chosen, valued, and secure. But they didn't. And little by little, I began measuring my worth by someone else's willingness to show up for me. That's a dangerous place to be. Because when another person becomes the mirror through which you evaluate your value, disappointment becomes almost inevitable. I kept telling myself I was being loyal. I told myself I was fighting for the relationship. I told myself that persistence was a virtue. But what I was really doing was staying attached to the promise of maybe. Maybe things would improve. Maybe next month would be different. Maybe if I explained myself one more time. Maybe if I loved harder. Maybe if I asked for less. Maybe if I became less. I brought my whole self into that relationship. I listened. I tried to understand. I made space for their needs. I worked hard to be thoughtful and considerate. At times, I even made myself smaller in an effort to not outshine them. And still, I found myself sitting in the same pool of disappointment, again and again. I watched my health suffer. I watched my work suffer. I watched my peace suffer. And the most painful part wasn't what was happening around me. It was what was happening within me. Because one day I realized something. I didn't like who I had become. I had spent so much time trying to preserve the relationship that I had stopped preserving myself. I had become someone who was constantly waiting, constantly hoping, constantly negotiating my own needs, constantly looking for evidence that things were getting better. I brought a full glass into that situation. But over time, it felt as though someone kept poking holes in the container and bleeding my heart out onto the floor. Not all at once, slowly, through compromises, through disappointments, through unmet needs that I convinced myself weren't that important. Of course, I take responsibility for my part in the story. I stayed beyond the season of expiration. I've spent a lot of time reflecting on where I was emotionally during that chapter of my life, the influences around me, the pressures to stay, and the sacrifices I was willing to make in an effort to save something that was no longer serving me. I wasn't staying because I was happy. I was staying because I was hopeful. And hope, when detached from reality, can keep us trapped far longer than we realize. Eventually, something had to give, and something did. Not because I stopped caring, not because I stopped loving, but because I finally understood that loyalty should never require the abandonment of self. Sometimes the greatest act of devotion is not staying. Sometimes the greatest act of devotion is choosing yourself enough to leave. Part 3, friendships, jobs, family, and dreams. In regards to friendships, sometimes we outgrow people. Not because they're bad, not because we're bad. Growth changes us. And if I'm honest, this lesson wasn't learned from one relationship. It was learned from several chapters of my life. Quite a few years ago, I was friends with someone who at the time felt deeply aligned with my values. We were both passionate about making a difference in the world. We spent hours talking about ideas, philosophy, leadership, human behavior, global issues, and all the ways we hope to leave things better than we found them. It was one of those friendships that energizes you, the kind where you leave a conversation feeling inspired, the kind where you think, I'm glad people like this exist. This person challenged me to grow. They encouraged me to think differently. They reinforced the belief that growth wasn't something to fear. It was something to pursue. And for a season of my life, that friendship was exactly what I needed. But life has a way of introducing new experiences, new people, and new environments. Over time, we both found ourselves moving through different circles and different networks. We were exposed to new perspectives and new priorities. Some of those experiences challenged the very values that we had once bonded over. At first, the shift was subtle. There were fewer phone calls, fewer lunches, fewer get-togethers, fewer spontaneous conversations. The connection that once felt effortless began to require effort. Then came misunderstandings, tension, blame that seemed to appear out of nowhere. And eventually, what had once been a meaningful friendship slowly began to dissolve. Not with a dramatic ending, not with a single explosive event, just slowly, quietly, like two people drifting farther and farther apart until one day they realize they are no longer standing on the same shore. And that was painful. Because when we talk about grief, we often talk about death. But we don't talk enough about grieving living people. People who are still out there in the world. People you may still see from time to time. People who once knew intimate details of your life, but now feel like strangers. We've crossed paths again over the years through mutual circles. We've shared rooms, shared conversations, shared space, but the friendship was never the same. For a long time, I wrestled with that. I wondered what I could have done differently. I replayed conversations. I questioned my role in the outcome. But eventually, I realized something important. Not every friendship is meant to last forever. Some friendships are for a season. Some are for a specific chapter. Some people walk beside us long enough to teach us what we need to learn before continuing on their own path. And that doesn't diminish the value of what we shared. In fact, I think part of maturity is learning how to honor a relationship for what it was, without demanding that it remain what it used to be. Sometimes growth means holding gratitude and grief in the same hand. I can appreciate what that friendship gave me. I can acknowledge the pain of losing it. And I can accept that both things can be true at the same time. In regards to jobs, people stay in jobs that slowly drain them because they don't want to disappoint others. They become loyal to organizations that would replace them in a week. There was a period of my life when I believed my value came from how much I could carry. I said yes to everything. I stayed late. I fixed problems that weren't mine. I took responsibility for outcomes I couldn't control. I believed being needed was the same thing as being valued. And it wasn't. With family, sometimes family systems teach us that loyalty means silence, that peace means pretending, that love means tolerating behavior that damages us. And with our dreams, sometimes we're devoted to a version of life that no longer exists. We keep trying to resurrect something that has already ended. Part 4, why good people get stuck. Good people are often the easiest people to trap because good people see potential, give second chances, believe in redemption, and they just want to help. These are beautiful qualities until they're used against us or until we use them against ourselves. As a mental health professional, people often assume I always know when to leave. I don't. Understanding human behavior doesn't make you immune to being human. Part 5, some questions to ask yourself. If this situation never changed, would I still choose it? Am I in love with reality or potential? Am I staying because I genuinely want to, or because leaving feels like failure? What is this costing me emotionally? Who am I becoming while I remain here? That last question changed my life. Who am I becoming while I remain here? Part 6. The difference between quitting and releasing. Many people stay because they believe leaving means failure, or because of some nod to responsibility. Some people stay because they feel a sense of obligation. Maybe they feel like they can change the individual or situation with persistence and time. But sometimes leaving isn't quitting. Sometimes leaving is wisdom. Sometimes leaving is courage. Sometimes leaving is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. If you found yourself daft and devoted to something lately, I want you to know that you're not alone. Most of us have been there. I've been there more than once, more than twice. The goal isn't to become cold. The goal isn't to stop caring. The goal is to stop giving pieces of yourself to things that are no longer capable of holding them. Maybe the lesson isn't to become less devoted. Maybe the lesson is to become devoted to the right things, to your peace, to your healing, to your values, to your future. Because there is a difference between commitment and captivity. And some of us have been calling captivity loyalty for far too long. If you're exhausted from carrying something that was never yours to carry, maybe this is your permission slip. Not to stop caring, not to stop loving, but to stop abandoning yourself in the process. You owe it to your future self and your future loves, friendships, jobs, and situations to continue to be the best of yourself. You are worth more than one person's opinion, one bad review, failed relationships, and sleepless nights. You are royalty. Step into your light. Until next time, stay rooted in who you are and keep rising towards who you're becoming. I'm Dr. Carmela Maxell, and this has been Rooted in Rising. Join me every Tuesday for a new episode, and please share this with anyone that needs it. Follow me on Instagram at @TheRealCarmelaMaxell and visit my website for more info, http://carmelamaxell.com. Also, check out my debut novella, Bereavement, now available on Amazon.